Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we uncover the wisdom, resilience, and possibilities that come with growing older. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Becky Blue. Becky is the author of Turning: The Magic and Mystery of More Days. Becky brings a fresh and inspiring perspective on aging, challenging the stereotypes of a youth-obsessed culture and encouraging us to embrace life's third act with grace, joy, and purpose. Becky will share insights on redefining aging, the profound power of relationships, and inspiring stories of individuals who have discovered new passions and fulfillment later in life. Her work offers a vibrant and hopeful roadmap for anyone looking to age well and thrive in the years ahead. Becky, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'd like you to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write your book, Turning: The Magic and Mystery of More Days.
Well, thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here. And thanks for all the super content. I've really had fun listening to your podcast. I've been learning a lot. Oh, yeah, I feel like my story fits in with you. I am a retired nurse, and all through my nursing career, I really love looking at people, body, mind, and spirit. I feel like we're very whole beings. And so then and a lot of my more recent career had to do with faith community nursing and grant writing. And so I fell back into this love of writing. So I decided to start writing a blog. And then I was coming up on my 60th birthday and all my friends were freaking out. And I thought, hey, I've got this. I'm actually trained as a geriatric clinical nurse specialist. I should know. I've got a library full of books about aging. I should be able to conquer this or be able to at least face it. And so it happened to be during the pandemic, right at the beginning. And so I had a lot of time to write, as we all had a lot of time. And so I just started writing. And it was such a blessing to be able to write and then find a publisher and then decide that I'm going to put it out there and see if I can help some other people. And so it's just been a great journey.
And so you critique the quote unquote anti-aging culture that's promoted by the beauty and fitness industries. What harm do you see in this narrative?
Well, I think if you are a person like me who looks at people, body, mind, and spirit, there's a real heavy effort on preventing aging in our body, right? And that's putting that mind and spirit to the side, where to me, that's where really the richness comes with aging. And now I'm 65. And so the last 5 years, I feel like I've lived into my book or used it as a field guide. And yeah, I mean, we all want to look good, right? But I'm finding I'm focusing more on my mind and my spirit. And it really impacts how I feel. It impacts the relationships with other people. So if you are just focusing on beauty and what you can buy from the Madison Avenue advertisers, you're missing like 2/3 of it all.
Yeah, we started this podcast as two exercise physiologists and trying to focus a little bit more on kind of the health side of it all. I mean, still being preventative and still looking at the healthy side of it, not the appearance, not how can you get six-pack abs and still be 60 and all that kind of BS. But as we've gone on with this podcast, it has taken on much more of key themes like gratitude, and we spell gratitude with two T's. We have what my friend Jay has labeled as SPIES, because I always talk about spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being. And he's like, did you intentionally order it in that way? Because it spells out SPIES. And I never picked up on that. But I order it in that way because I do think the spiritual and the physical really dovetail together. The spiritual has to lead the physical. And I think when we get on that physical, and I think that's what you're talking about, that kind of anti-aging mentality where we think it's all about the physical and we're looking at our bodies and how they're starting to change and how they're getting wrinkled, and there might be a little bit more body fat on there and all the other stuff that comes with the perception of aging. And that tends to be the focus, and we want to counter that. And so that's why I'm excited to have you here to talk about your book and just your evolution into understanding a little bit more about the aging process. So how can we start celebrating aging as a natural and empowering part of life instead of resisting it?
Well, I think step one is hopefully being able to find some good role models of aging and maybe you and I could be a couple of those.
I think we
Um,
are.
I think we are, right? But I think the big thing is even just being willing to talk about it. So, and I do think even in the last, since I turned 60, I feel like aging has been a little more on the forefront. I mean, we see it in our political arena, we see it in entertainment. People who are still stepping up even in their older years. And, but I think it's important for each person to find some good role models of aging and then to just talk about it. Talk about it at the coffee shop with your friends. It shouldn't be a taboo topic.
Do you find yourself celebrating your age more now that you've taken on this perspective?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I will tell you, I've always been a real birthday person. I absolutely love birthdays and I'm all about throwing parties and all that. But yeah, I would say I definitely celebrate it more now. And the subtitle to my book, The Magic and Mystery of More Days, I think it reminds me that you can, every age can have some magic. And definitely every age has mystery. And so it's interesting to find when I light another birthday candle. Okay, how have I changed? Or what am I braver about? I think I'm braver. What am I more curious about? Curious is one of my favorite words. And I think that could be there for anybody, no matter what you're dealing with in body, mind, and spirit.
So I find myself as a college professor teaching exercise physiology
Mm.
that I tend to get more proud of my age when I'm talking to my students. It's like, yeah, this whole idea of aging. And when we go through like the normative data on things like VO2 max and
Yeah.
strength and all those kind of things, I point out to them,
Mhm.
it's like, this is ridiculous that they tell me that when I'm 22, if I can bench my weight, I'm in average fitness. But now that I'm 60, I'm 61 now, in my
Okay.
60s, being able to bench my body weight, it makes me like superhuman. It's like, that should not be the
Oh,
case.
yeah. Talk about low expectations,
Yeah,
right?
it's like because
Oh my
everybody else
gosh.
declines
Yeah.
so rapidly, our
Mhm.
expectations are that we should decline rapidly rather than defying the aging process.
Yes, and I hope we're getting some fresh research around some of those parameters. One of the things, and I know you're into exercise, so I was hoping we could talk a little bit about. I'm obsessed by,
Okay.
and as a geriatric nurse, I took care of way too many people who fell, broke their hips, whatever, had a huge change of lifestyle because of it. I'll be darned if I'm not going to hurt myself. I mean, I might fall once or twice, but I am going to have great balance so I can prevent that. So, about 18 months ago, I started taking ballet. And also in my Pilates that I have weekly, my instructor's been observing how much longer I can do my single leg stand. And she's been working with me for 15 years. And so I'm having a better one leg now at 65 than I did at 50.
Yeah, and we have one of my early guests was this guy Carmine Arpea, who I was introduced to through an old friend of mine from Long Island, New York, and he was the fitness director for Peconic Landing, which is a continuous care retirement community on Long
Mm,
Island. And he just recently retired from that. But in his work, they always used to refer to this equation that they used for balance as Carmine's law. And I
mm,
officially published it in my Pathophysiology and Exercise textbook. So it's now an official law, at least from my regard. So we call it Carmine's law, but it states that strength plus posture equals balance. And I really like that because
mhm,
those are the two really key components. A lot of times we train for balance by just having you, okay, I'm going to have you stand on one leg as long as you can. And
mhm,
okay, you get good at maybe standing at that particular stance, but does that
mhm,
translate into you being able to prevent a fall as you're walking along and you step on a
mhm,
crack or something on a curb, or you come to an uneven surface and you have to adjust quickly? And we know that balance is our ability to maintain our center of mass within our base of
mhm,
support. And so posture always brings that into a more centered position. The more upright we can walk and stand,
mhm,
better our balance is going to be. And I suspect that your balance is a lot better because you've been doing the Pilates and the other activities that are
mhm,
improving on both your
mhm.
strength and your posture. And that translates into a little bit more balance.
Yes, I'm passionate about posture, and actually, I've cited a research study in my book where there was people observe older adults, and ultimately they said that those who had better posture were perceived to be 15 years younger than they really were.
Wow.
So if that isn't something to grab those people who are thinking more about the body piece of it, just stand up straight like your mom used to tell you to do.
Right.
So I'm there with you, but I hadn't heard about that formula. I love that. Strength push posture equals balance.
Balance. Yep.
Oh, that's so good. Okay.
So it's Carmine's Law,
Hmm.
according
Hmm.
to Dr. Jeff Armstrong.
Perfect. I'll
So
remember it.
yeah, I like that, and I really stress it to my students because it's if you want to be able to move better, you're not going to do it as you continue to slip into this kyphotic build. We get weaker,
Hmm.
and I really encourage, and I've had a shift in my own perspective of exercise since really got into exercise physiology. Because when I started studying it, I guess I started studying it really in the 70s when I was in high school and learning resistance training and all that kind of stuff. But as I got into the field of exercise physiology in the mid 80s, it was cardiovascular. It was
Oh.
high carbs, low fat, and a lot of cardio, heart health.
Mhm.
And I think we neglected the strength training. And it
Yeah.
was a number of years ago, it was at the American College of Sports Medicine conference when they were honoring a bunch of the senior fellows in the organization. And I watched some of these guys walking on, and they're only in their probably mid 80s, but they were all like shuffling. They're very kyphotic and
Mm.
slumped over, very frail looking. It's like, that isn't how I want to look when I'm in my 80s.
Right. Right.
And I realized it's like the reason they're like that is because they focus on cardio. And you do cardio without the strength training, you tend to overall lose muscle mass over
Mhm.
time. And as you lose muscle mass, you're going to lose functionality. And it just becomes this vicious cycle where you just get frailer and frailer. You might have a great heart. You might not die of a heart attack,
Mhm.
but you
Mhm.
may end up dying of a fall or something like that because you don't have the strength, the balance, the agility, and those types of things to be able to move more
Mhm.
effectively. And
Mhm.
so I emphasize so much more the strength because cardio is easy to maintain if you just keep moving. And if you're
Sure.
strong, you
Sure.
can keep moving.
Mhm.
And so that's been a pretty strong emphasis in kind of my field. And I'm talking too much. This is an interview of you.
No, that's okay
So,
because I'm really curious about because I actually want to ask you a question because one of the things I feel like I've gotten through Pilates is that I'm not just working those large muscle groups, I'm working those small ones.
right.
And I know I'm doing so much of that in ballet, where if you were to walk into my ballet class, you'd probably think, well, this doesn't look very hard. But it actually is. We are isolating, we're doing those turnouts, we're doing those positions, and we're really having to use those smaller muscles. And I feel like that is something that we need to really be reminding people about in that strength discussion. So I'm curious how you bring that in.
I emphasize at the start of any kind of strengthening program the importance of the hips and the rotator cuff muscles
Yeah.
because those are the
Yeah.
what tie our limbs to our trunk. And if those are weak, we're going to have all kind of health issues and injuries and things like that, particularly in the hips. When we talk about people tearing their ACLs, it's because they have weak hips. It's not because they have weak
Yes. Yes.
knees.
Absolutely.
And ballet, I mean, I challenge you to show me any senior ballerina who does not still have great posture,
Absolutely.
because they're emphasizing those small muscles to contract, to stay upright, to balance themselves,
Mm-hmm.
to maintain those positions. And so, yeah, and anymore, you look at a lot of ballerinas, they're much more muscular than they used to be. And I think some of it
Yes.
is there's a little less of that emphasis on that frail, thin, wafy
Mm-hmm.
looking build
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
ballerinas that they're doing more in the dance movements that require more strength, and so
Mm-hmm.
they do have a little bit more musculature to them. I mean, they don't look like sprinters or anything, but they're a bit more muscular. But I think a lot of it is because they're working those small muscles that control the body.
Mm-hmm.
And we do
Mm-hmm.
neglect those. We go to the gym, it's like, oh, I want big biceps or I want big
Yeah.
chest, big chest.
Exactly.
And I tell my athletes that I work with, it's like, why are you wasting your time? Why is it the first exercise you do in the gym is the bench press and the bicep curl when
Mm-hmm.
those are the least necessary muscles in your body?
So
If
good.
let's get the hit in the big muscles that also have the small controlling muscles. I mean, I love
Mm-hmm.
functionally the squat, is the best exercise. And I've
Mm-hmm.
shifted over to me, if I could only do one exercise, it would be a Zercher squat. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where you hold the bar in the crux of the arm. And it requires a lot more core. It requires that you have to track those hip muscles to get your legs out of the way so that you
Mm-hmm.
can squat deep enough. Really works the abs, works the upper back, works the trapezius. I mean, it's a great postural exercise. I love it. And it's a hard exercise too, because it's not comfortable holding the weight in that position.
Sure.
But for me, it's an easier position, and I just enjoy it. So I push it a lot more. I'm going on my Zercher soapbox and
No,
from
that's
the
awesome.
standpoint.
I mean, this is such rich information. And the other thing, I'm just going to give you a little tip, and you've maybe used this. I think as an adult learner, I need a lot of word pictures from my
Mm.
coach. And so my Pilates instructor, she always says, pretend you're putting your scapula muscles or whatever you call them into two big deep pockets. And so I'm even doing that here while I sit. So maybe your listeners might appreciate that. So if you could just I used to go to Pilates shows like this or like this mostly.
Yeah,
Like, yeah. So she's like, okay, just relax the neck, but put those shoulder blades into two big pockets. And that just helps my posture so much.
yeah, it's good instruction, because a lot of times people, they think posture, they just pull their
Yeah.
shoulder blades
Yeah.
back and retract them, but
Yeah.
that's not really still good posture.
No,
You
I need
want
to
to
go
have that kind
down.
of relaxed, and it also helps you to elevate the vertebral column and just lengthen everything out and keep that height and just keep a nice positioning. That's a great cue. I have to remember that one. See, I learn things on this podcast, and I think that's the main reason that I do the podcast. Is part of it is we
Exactly.
want to instruct people, but I think I learn more in the process of trying to instruct. So thank you for
Mhm.
that.
Absolutely.
So back to your book and your
Mhm.
area, and asking you the questions. You emphasize the importance of supportive partnerships and loving relationships in aging well.
Yeah.
Why are these so vital?
Well, what I find is, and you've read this and you've read people talking on your podcast about it. I mean, the most pervasive chronic illness in America is loneliness, and it impacts us body, mind, and spirit. So, when I was a geriatric nurse and I was part of an interdisciplinary team, and we would evaluate, like somebody would bring their mom in, trying to decide, can mom still live at home? That kind of question. And one of my favorite questions to ask was, how many people can you call if you need help or assistance? And a lot of people were able to say, oh, I've got 3 or 4 people I can call. And sometimes it was only one. I think one time I had somebody say 0. I mean, how
Oh, wow, that
heartbreaking is
hurts.
that?
Yeah.
That hurts, right? And so we need to foster those relationships. Another thing I always like to say is it's okay to get new friends as you're older. And that's what I find when this next chapter of life, when you get curious about different things, you might end up kind of finding new friends, and that's okay. Doesn't mean you have to leave the old ones, but to develop new relationships is great. The other thing I always like, recommend to people, especially like this time of year, is to take an inventory of your friendships and their ages. And I always tell people you should have a friend from each decade of life. So, do you have a friend who's in their teens? Do you have a friend in their 20s, one in their 30s, one in their 40s? And not just that you can check the box, but that you really are someone that you would call or text or sit down and have coffee with. So, relationships are so key. And I think one of the chapters in my book, which I feel is just at the crux of making sure that those relationships are authentic and rich, is to lean into forgiveness. And so I can't stress that enough for people that especially sometimes at this age, we've carried some of those past hurts and burdens with us for so long. And at some point, if you can let go and forgive another person, that makes the relationship just so much more valuable and meaningful and full of love.
Yeah, it's interesting. Through the podcast, I've evolved my pillars of aging well. When I first started, it would have had 4 pillars. Something that I always taught in my pathophysiology and exercise class was that if you want to have good longevity and be disease free as you age, it's exercise and physical activity, maintain a
Mhm.
healthy body composition, eat a healthy diet, and don't smoke. And then we've added, sleep hygiene in there as well. But one that just keeps coming up repeatedly is social connectedness. And not only that, we've added in front of that purposeful social connections, because a lot of people have social connections. I mean, I think, oh, I got a lot of friends. I go out, go and meet my buddies at the bar on Thursday nights, and we hang out and drink beer and
Uh-huh.
watch sports or something. That's not necessarily, and are those really the people that when you do need somebody, when you have to call somebody, they're going to be the ones that are coming to your support? And so it's those people that are relationships that are going to be mutually beneficial, I think is probably a
Mhm.
poor way of
And
saying
I
it, but
no, I think that's true. And another, besides forgiveness, the one thing I like to remind people that I write about is that difference, rather than being in conversation, be in dialogue. That there is a difference between conversation and dialogue. And I would say what we're having here is a great dialogue. So you're really listening to that other person and you're playing off of what they're saying. You don't come in with a preconceived agenda about, I always laugh about sometimes older people, we like to go through our organ recital, like, oh, my back hurts today. I got a headache. I can't hear. Avoid the organ recital. And just yesterday, I got to be on a podcast, and the woman asked me a great question. It was very simple. We could all take it with us. And it was just, what's next for you? What a great question. What's next
yeah,
for you? And so to just be more in dialogue, and I guess probably the basis of that, which we've all heard so many times, to just be a good listener, give people the
right.
gift of listening.
I think that is something we often miss in a lot of conversations. I've had conversations with people where it's like, you really don't want to hear from me. You just want to talk.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I think we could do that a lot better. Even when we try and listen, are we really listening? Are we really hearing? Are we looking for the undertones, the words between the words, and looking at the body language and all those types of things that we probably don't do well enough?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of, like, I've had international friends that really don't like how Americans will greet one another by saying, how's it going? We don't expect an answer when we say, how's it going? And I
Mhm.
think we need to get to a point where when we ask somebody, how you doing? We're waiting for a response. And how would it affect people if we actually said to them, no, I mean it. How are you doing? And really push them to tell us, how are they doing?
Absolutely. And that all kind of fits in. I mean, we haven't talked a lot about why I called the book Turning. I mean, the obvious thing is because I was turning 60. That's why I called it Turning. I love that you said you love posture because I do too. And the overall overarching reason I chose turning is because rather than turning into ourselves when we age and becoming our own project, self-improvement project, whatever, or focused on our own organ recital, the idea should be that we turn out, we look out to the world, we look up to a higher power and really listen to what does the world need from me right now?
That's a fascinating statement. I love that. And so I just started another podcast, which is We Have a Spiritual Problem, that's evolved off of this one, because I have these kind of conversations with people. And as I've been doing the first few interviews, I find myself in these long pauses because it's like, okay, where do I go from here? I have a list of relative questions that I ask, but it's like, wow, I just need to take a breath and absorb that response. And so it becomes this long response, which is fine when you're just having a conversation with people. But when you're producing a podcast or people be sitting there listening, it's like, okay, is it over? Did it stop? What's going on here?
Exactly.
So you have
Don't
to
dead
edit those
silence. That's
pauses out.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what
that's funny.
advice do you have for people who are feeling isolated and disconnected as they age?
Well, I guess the first thing would be to try to look out, turn your head, turn your eyes, be curious, pick up the phone, reconnect with people, um, talk to, I mean, I guess I'm just too extroverted. I love talking to strangers. And for too long, we've been told don't talk to strangers. But if you're running your cart in the grocery store, start a conversation with someone. And I get that takes some bravery and courage, but it takes some bravery and courage to get old. My dad always said aging is not for sissies. And so you're really in charge of your own place in this earth where your feet are. And so if you can put them where somebody else is, even if they're sitting next to you on the subway or on a bus or whatever, the name of my company is Made with Words. And I just feel like obviously, words are so powerful, but we dismiss them. And just like your great example of we ask how they are, but we don't really listen to find out how they are. So I would just encourage people to be curious and to be in conversation or dialogue.
And I appreciate those people who do reach out to you and ask you the questions and try and engage you in conversation, because I am a bit more of an introvert. I'm not the person that's going to go around. My dad was the complete opposite. I mean, he'd walk into a room and he met so many different celebrities and things like that because the way he would walk in a room and engage with people,
Yeah.
they just thought they were supposed to know him. And so they were just like, okay, I must know him. They just engage
I
in the
love it.
way
Yeah.
that they think they know him. And he
Mhm.
just had great conversations with people that it's like, how do you get to meet these people?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm not as good with that. And so I really appreciate it if somebody reaches out to me and asks the questions. And I'm more
Mhm.
willing to talk once I get the engagement going, but I'm not the initiator very well. So how can older adults overcome a fear of starting something new in their life?
Mm. Yeah, fear. I think I've got a chapter in a book about fear versus trust. And I think those are things that sort of a dichotomy, right? That we all sort of deal with. And for me, being now this gets a little bit spiritual, so forgive me, I guess. But for me, it's like, okay, I'm good. God's got me. If I fail at something, it's okay. I just don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to break a hip. But I think just sort of look again for those role models. And if I tell you that, yeah, 18 months ago, I decided to start ballet, well, that was a brave act. Yeah. And so just be a little bit brave, do something new, go eat somewhere new, go take a different route to the grocery store, whatever. I mean, baby steps. And then maybe all of a sudden you'll be like, I'm going to plan a trip. I gave a TEDx talk about you're never too young to choose how to age. And it talked a lot about how the goal being that we can not have this steady decline in our life, but really just maybe we even improve and as we get older. Anyway, there was a woman in the audience who was, I think, 60, and she shared with me later, she goes, "After hearing you speak, I went home and I booked 4 trips." So, I think you just and she was just so energized.
Yeah.
So I think just whether it's a small step or a big step, it will start transforming you. And I think that's this beauty of this third act. I like to call retirement the end of repetition. I think so often in our working years, because we have to, we stay in this routine and we do what we have to do, and all those expectations are met. But there's this glorious open calendar really as we retire, and it's up to us to decide what we're going to fill it with.
Go back to my dad and just the different things. And he's had a lifetime of taking just weird risks and doing things
Mhm.
that you're like, really, you would do that? I mean, when he was young, he did a lot of stand-up comedy. I
Oh
remember
gosh.
he always used to tell a story about being on the same card with Flip Wilson before Flip Wilson came out with the Geraldine, which some of our listeners might know who Geraldine is, some might
Oh
not.
yeah.
But he got to see Geraldine before anybody else did. And he did that kind of stuff for a while. And then he got back into it after his wife had retired. He was still working his consulting business in Pittsburgh, and she took a job heading up the YWCA in New York. And so they had to move from
Hmm.
Pittsburgh to New York. So he had to give up his business. So it
Mhm.
forced him into retirement. And so he needed some stuff to do. She's like, why don't you try some acting? And so he got an agent and he was getting a lot of extra work. And he was really on that cusp of probably getting some speaking roles had they stayed in New York a little bit longer. But I mean, he was on Law and Order, Criminal Intent, like every episode. He
Oh,
was like a
oh,
regular extra on the show. It was on. We watch Elf as we're recording this, it's the Christmas season, and
Yeah.
he's in Elf, and we watch it
Oh my
every year
God.
just to see him in that Central Park
Okay, you got to tell me
scene where
what
there's,
scene he's in. Central Park.
yeah,
Okay.
it's that Central Park scene when they're singing the
Oh,
the
at the
the
end?
song. Yeah, I forget what song they're
Yeah.
singing, but he's in the
You
back. He's back probably in the back row in probably about the right quarter of the screen.
yeah. You have to sing
And
loud for all to
yeah,
hear or
yeah,
whatever,
that's
right?
right. Yeah, you'll probably be able to figure out who he is because it's my favorite joke. We use the same line with the same facial disfigurements. So he looks a lot alike, except he has hair. I should put that in quotation marks. My dad wore a hairpiece at that time. So, but yeah, you might just see him in there. And he's in Wedding Crashers. There's one scene where he's like, depending on which kind of variation of it. I mean, I didn't realize they have different variations of movies that,
Oh,
yeah, they're edited differently for different purposes. And so
okay.
there's a scene in the big wedding reception that he's either the only one on camera or it's him and this other woman. They flash to them as they're there. And yeah, he was in It's Part of the Family, which is a movie with all three generations of the Douglases, Kirk,
Oh,
Michael, and
yeah.
Cameron.
Mhm.
And he was actually invited by Kirk Douglas to be at the table at the wake. Now you only see the back quarter of his head, but that's him on camera. And he was
Yeah.
invited there by Kirk Douglas. I mean, he was selected by all the people there as extras to be at that table. And then there's another scene where you can see him back in the distance behind the conversation. But it's fun. Yeah, he's done that stuff. I mean, he tried out for the Steelers back in the 60s.
Mm.
And he never played football in high school or college. And yet he made it to training camp. And it's like, and there were so many times in my life, like I grew up, I'm going to go off on a tangent and be way too self-revealing here, but
That's okay.
my
Nurse,
parent,
people always do that with me. It's okay.
my parents divorced when I was like freshman in high school. And it was a struggle with me and my mom. And I didn't learn it until much later that part of the struggle was because I reminded her so much of my dad, just physically, personality wise, and all those types of things. I didn't realize how
Mm.
hard it was for her. I always just, and it caused a bit of a rift for a while. But, like I said, like you said, forgiveness is important, especially as we get into our older years. And so we were able to mend those bridges.
Mhm.
But she used to always say, "You're just like your father." And I always took it as a negative.
Oh,
And when my dad, he would do these things, but not quite get to that level of success, I would take it personally on myself that I was never going to really perfectly succeed. And it took me years and years to realize, like my wife and I did a workshop was when we were engaged to get married. And one of the questions they asked was negative talk that you received growing up. And I was like, I never got negative talk. In fact, my parents were always overly supportive. And I felt like, oh, come on, I can't do this
yeah.
that well. I'm not that good.
Yeah.
But the only negative talk I could come up with was that statement of, you're just like your father. And then I realized it really wasn't negative talk. And it was a huge hurdle for me to get over that and realize that that was more of a hindrance. And that this idea of failing because you're trying things is a very
Mhm.
important part of life and aging well. And don't be afraid to do things that might cause you to not succeed because the
Yeah,
success is in the fact that you actually did it.
that's right. And dad, he probably would have loved your dad, is my dad always said, can't, never done nothing, which is really poor grammar. And my mom was an
No,
English teacher, which makes me laugh.
you're
But
not a
can't,
shirter, are
never
you?
done nothing. Oh, I'm at Johnson, which there are a lot of us. But he's just this Norwegian farmer, just plain spoken. And so I take that with me. And so maybe that's why I'm trying all these things. But I did want to mention that one of my main goals really in my work right now is I want to change the culture of aging, which I guess you would probably agree with that as well.
Absolutely.
But when you look at kind of change theory or culture, changing culture, the ways to do that are to tell stories. And I love that you shared that story. Thank you so much. But if we all tell our stories of aging, like you just shared the stories of your dad, that's how we little by little change the culture. And I've been meeting with book clubs recently, and I was listening to this I think I threw this question out, like, what have you done lately that kind of surprised you or somewhat unusual? And a lady raised her hand and she goes, well, there's a group of us that get together every Wednesday. And the promise is that we can't ever do the same thing and not any Wednesdays. We have to always do something new. And she said last Wednesday, we went over to our little skeet hill here and we all went tubing together. And so this group of 60 plus women were tubing in the middle of the afternoon. I thought, that's fantastic. I said, who
Yeah.
did you tell about that? And she just was quiet. I said, so that's an example of if you would tell that story, if you put the pictures on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, make sure you tell your grandchildren, whoever you want to, and little by little, we change the culture of aging by sharing those stories.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Back to your can't never done nothing. The reason I chuckled with that is when I lived in New York, pastor at the church I was going to, he was raised in Oklahoma. He was a farm boy, and his dad always taught us his dad raised him can't never done nothing.
Oh
The
my
same
God.
grammar. Yes, it's like wow. I've not heard anybody else tell that, and I've
I've
taken
never
that
heard
with
anybody
me.
else say that either. I might have to
I
get on,
say it all the time. I tell my kids
wow.
that, and my
Yeah.
daughter pushes back on it all the time. Said she's trying to find that one thing or an example where can't did something and cannot do anything. It's the whole point. And so I think that is a great aging well statement is can't never done nothing. So
Yeah. The other thing he always said, which I always cringe if my teenagers heard it, is he would always say, yeah, let's do something even if it's wrong.
yeah, I don't know if I'd want to tell my kids that.
No, I don't think so. I don't
Well,
think so.
mom, you told me it was okay.
Yeah.
Kids were going out drinking. I know it was wrong,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you told me to do
Yeah.
it.
Exactly. No, I think it was usually in the context of when this sort of decision paralysis, when we couldn't decide what to do next, like where to go on vacation or where to go eat or what to have for
Yeah.
supper. He would just say, let's do something, even if it's wrong. That's helpful too. It's like, I think we all get in that stew of decision paralysis and just do something.
Yeah.
Just move, right? Just move. Yeah.
And I think that goes along with the whole idea of not being afraid to fail. We had Jim Harshaw, his podcast used to be Success Through Failure.
Mm.
And I always loved that kind of theme where you're succeeding if you're failing because you're moving forward and you're always
Mm-hmm.
going beyond the bounds of what you are currently capable of doing. And the more you push those boundaries, the more you're going to grow. I mean, you cannot grow without challenging and without failing. And from a
Exactly.
physiological standpoint, that physiology feeds into my spiritual views and my intellectual, emotional, and all that. You cannot be growing if you are not failing on occasion. And I think
And
that's
that,
important as we age.
yeah, absolutely. And I talk about forgiveness, and a lot of times the forgiveness has to come back to you. You have to forgive yourself,
Yeah.
you know? And so maybe you did make some bad choices along the way or whatever, but let those go. The frozen thing, let go.
I don't believe there are bad choices. And
Mm.
you get in a little bit more of a spiritual dimension with that, but it's like there might be wrong decisions to an extent, but the decisions that we make, good or bad, are always pointing us to where we are right now. So we can't look back at least and say, I would do this differently. Because if we did it differently, even though it might have been the right thing to do at that point by society standards, we may not be the same person we are right now. And somebody else may not
Yeah.
be the same person that they are. So you can't look back and say, I made a mistake here. This was the decision I made. I accept it. And what do I do now from where that has delivered me?
I really appreciate when you said other people's lives might be different. And my husband and I married to an entrepreneur, physician turned entrepreneur. So we're always trying these different small businesses. And some of them have worked and some of them haven't. But I always say, think about all our employees who ended up moving to Nashville or wherever we were doing this, and they ended up meeting their spouse. They ended up, you really impact people's lives. Maybe it impacted ours a little more negatively, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. I like that there really aren't any bad choices. The other thing I love to do at this age, and it's a gift that you really can only do maybe at this age. I love that game of connect the dots. I always loved doing those when I was little. But now when you're my age, you connect the dots your whole life. And I look back and I see that the decisions I made professionally have led me to this point, have led me to be a writer, have led me to write this book. And I'm so thankful, even though at the time there were maybe some of those dots that just felt sort of not that much fun.
Yeah.
But it's really glorious to look back and see where God has connected them all for you.
In this youth obsessed culture, how do we amplify the voices and contributions of the older generation?
That's really good. I think it's in telling the stories. I know about intergenerational activities. And like I said, having friends from every decade. One of the concepts I really like is called generativity. And it's the idea of sort of two ways that kind of looking at how am I leaving the world a better place? But then it's also asking yourself, what have I learned from my children or from the young people in my life? And so I think we need to, it goes back to dialogue. Just when you sit around the table with your kids, have some serious conversation, or you're meeting friends in a whatever activity you're at. Just tell me what's important to you right now. And then maybe hopefully they would ask you the same question. And so that I think it's dialogue. I just am hopeful. I feel like this next round of people who are coming up, and I get mixed up if we're calling them millennials or whatever, who's next. I feel like they're not quite so valuing of their privacy. They're willing to share, obviously, because of social media. And so I think the page will turn on. That will just be much more open. And that's my hope anyway.
I hope so. And I hope that with that generation, there's also a care and a willingness to listen to others, because I think a lot of things that happen with social media is it's people presenting themselves, but they're not always as open to being on the receiving end of social
Mm.
media, right? That they
Yeah.
And I found that for myself with like Facebook, as our generation took Facebook away from the younger
Yeah.
generation.
Right. Now,
Um,
you'll never find anybody like under 30 on Facebook, right?
True. I found myself oftentimes venting just
Mm.
different frustrations or whatever. And I realized I'm just bringing a negative presence to this platform.
Mhm.
And I started shifting my mindset to trying to draw other people in. Just like one common thing I'll do periodically is just type out the statement, I'm praying for someone special. And sometimes that's influenced by somebody who has shared that they have got something going on, and you don't want to just put on there, hey, yeah, I'm praying for Joe Schmo. He, has
Mhm.
cancer or something like that. But I found that people who are struggling with something, they read that and they feel like, okay, he's here for me. Whether I even know that they have an issue or not, I feel like that helps. And just trying to be positive, bringing a positive message to it. And a lot of times when I'm struggling, when I'm the most positive on social media or in my blog and those types of things, it's probably a reflection of what that I'm struggling with something pretty
Mhm.
much,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I need to just vent in a way, but I need to vent in a way that's going to be positive and encouraging to myself and to others.
Mhm.
And it really helps. I need to probably do it more. And I could generally tell when I'm not in the best space is by gauging what kind of comments I'm putting on social media.
Right. And as much as we hear negative about social media, and it could be just an amazing tool for back to your original question about how to prevent isolation or loneliness in older adults. And or maybe now even with AI, what can we do to keep people engaged and relevant
Right.
in the world and really again turning outside themselves? I think that's the key. And so I as much as you can tell your story without being you tell your own story, but you're concerned about how is everybody else hearing it.
Yeah. And I love that with social media, as an aging adult and somebody who has moved around quite a bit, I like to keep contact with people, and
Mhm.
phone numbers change, addresses change, and it's hard to keep up with people. And so with that, there's always, if somebody comes to mind, I can search, and if I can't find them specifically, or I haven't been in contact with them, I could reach out to somebody else. Hey, have you talked to so and so in a while? And so those connections remain a little bit more solid as we age. Whereas I went through a period of time with when moving, my address changes, my phone number changes, people move, and you've lost contact with them. And it's been like 20 years since you've talked to them. You have no idea how to get a hold of them. Now with social media, it's like better white pages.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think is, I don't know if you do much on Facebook Marketplace. This is really an aside, but we were doing a big house remodel. And so I ended up Facebook Marketplacing so many items. And I'd have people just come to my house and pick them up. Oh my God. I met so many different people from so many walks of life. And I just thought, I don't know, I think Facebook Marketplace could be a key to meeting new people.
Just sell something just to meet
Just sell
somebody.
something.
I'm
I had a
lonely. I
guy,
need a new friend. What do I got here? Oh, I'm going to sell this.
it could happen. Because
Yeah.
there was a gentleman who kept wanting the camera equipment that I was selling. And he was actually not in hospice, he was in cancer treatment in our town. He was from a little rural area. So he was staying in a small apartment. And I swear he would come out every 4 days just to talk to me and buy some little new old flash or whatever. And so I guess my point being is there's people out there who aren't even that far away from your doorstep. You just want to have a relationship
Yeah.
and they could bring richness to your life. And so you just got to take that first step.
That guy's probably got a whole pile of camera equipment in his apartment that he doesn't use because he has no interest in photography, but he just appreciated having somebody to talk to.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
I benefited from it as well. Yeah.
that is great. So, what are some simple steps that people can take today to embrace age and find fulfillment? I think we've talked a little bit about some of that, but
Yeah. Again, I think it's just turning outside ourselves, being very what's going on in your community, maybe joining some new groups, getting into relationships with other older adults or finding, or not older adults even. I really love like ballet because my friends in ballet are in their 30s, 40s, maybe 50s. But so it's not about age. And maybe that's part of it. I can't really say that I think about my age very much. The number 65 is right, but yeah, it's just a number.
yeah,
When I used to teach employees in the hospital about how to care for people who are aging, I always said that older adults like enjoy people of every age. You don't pick your friends based on what age they are. I mean, you maybe do when you're in fourth grade because you're all on the playground at the same time. But when you're my age, you find other people who have some of the same interests, some of the same curiosities, and build a relationship. So I think and then it goes back to that idea of generativity. If you find somebody in those other age groups, you're going to learn something from them that will change you and that will make you more relevant. I think relevancy is an important thing to consider as an older adult. Am I relevant in 2020? Am I, for lack of a better word, interesting? Am I an interesting person? Well, if you meet somebody new, like the guy I met through Facebook Marketplace, well, there, you got a story you can tell with your friends. That's a fun
right.
story to tell. So do some new activities just so you have some stories. Stay interesting, and that will make you more interesting to other people, especially younger people.
And don't be afraid to do stupid stuff because those make great stories, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tell about all your foibles that happen. And I do blame some of those on my age, but
Yeah, I tell way too many of those stories when I'm lecturing to my students. So
yeah, they get a kick out of it, I'm sure.
they love that I can laugh at myself and they laugh with me. So it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So, is there one message you hope readers take away from your book, and what would that be?
I think the message is that the world needs you, even at 70, 80, 85, whatever. The world needs you. And so you need to just not be navel gazing, turn outside yourself, listen, and just be ready to step up. And I think that what's amazing to me is there are so many of us now retiring. I don't know the stats, you probably do, but it's just crazy amount of people, right, who are in their 65 plus age group. And I always think about what is the wisdom within that group or the knowledge. And in a way, more recently, we've just been shoving them down to Arizona or California or Florida, wherever they want to go, so they
Yeah.
can play golf and whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think as a society, we're really missing an opportunity to tap into that knowledge, that creativity, the resources that can happen in this age group. And I talk a fair amount about that in the book as well, how we as a society, we've really got to people our age.
I think there's a lot of missed opportunities to build some of these retirement communities in conjunction with elementary and middle schools and colleges, because both of those populations can hugely benefit from the older adults, and the older adults can benefit from them as well. And if we could build those social connections a little bit more, it gives people better opportunities to age well.
And
Just
unfortunately, we have to be real intentional about it these days because so many people they don't live by their grandparents, or I think we tend to put people in silos. So the 20 somethings stay together, the 30 somethings, 40 something. But if we can intentionally plan our communities or events or whatever it might be so that there's more of a intergenerational focus, then cross contamination, or what you want to call it, is going to happen.
so the question that we ask of all our guests: what are you doing personally to age well, besides the Pilates and the ballet?
Yeah, that's what I want to say. You know what? I think I'm just trying to listen more and listen to especially younger people and understand what they're going through. And that kind of is that concept of generativity. But if I can learn a new concept, or just the other day, I actually discovered a K-pop song that I absolutely love. And I've been more of a 70s music kind of girl. So just embracing other people's cultures and even beliefs and curiosities, again, I think it brings joy to me to just find that I've got something else in my head to think about.
My daughter is really into K-pop. I'm much more into the 70s rock music. My son enjoys that a little bit more with me, but I got to enjoy K-pop with her a bit more. So, and she's really interested in the Korean culture for some reason as well. So we're planning a trip for next year. She didn't get into an exchange program, and so we're like, well, it'd be a lot cheaper for me just to take you to Korea
I
for a
love
few
that.
weeks. And
Oh,
so I
it's
think we're just
amazing.
gonna take a trip out there next summer. So that should be fun. And will
Very
help me
good.
age well as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, why not? That's great.
Yeah. Well, Becky, where can our listeners and viewers find your book, and how can they connect with you? Do you have a website? Do you have social
Hmm.
media other than Facebook?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to have people grab the book. That Becky Blue Writes is my website. And the book is also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Becky J. Blue is my handle on Instagram. I love to do stories there and have people tag me if they've read my book. And yeah, I guess I am on Facebook, probably too much. But
Now, the big question is, do you do TikTok?
I have not started TikTok. Do you do
That's how
TikTok?
you connect. No, God, I could not do TikTok. I don't
I
even
just feel like it's
understand it.
a big black hole or something, right? You know,
Yeah.
I think sometimes somebody will send me some videos and I'm like, what is this? No, I don't do TikTok.
So looking forward, how do you hope our cultural understanding of aging will evolve?
I just hope it becomes a non-issue. Let's just get the word out of our vernacular.
Yeah.
Because and that kind of goes back to that TEDx talk about you're never too young to choose how to age. I mean, because obviously from day one when you're born, you're starting to age from a
Yeah.
biological standpoint. But I don't know why it's such a big deal.
I don't
And
either.
I think maybe in 10 years, you and I won't have anything to talk about with this topic, and we're just going to have to find something else we're really into, like K-pop or something. I don't know.
There you go. We'll still be doing K-pop dances and stuff like that as we're in our 80s.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful. I think it's going to look so much different in the next decade.
Oh, that's good. So, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we could just keep going. I wish you all the best with the book and with your work, and yeah, keep doing what you're doing and keep aging well.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to go watch Elf and look for your dad in that
So
music scene.
he'd
That was a great
appreciate that.
story.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks so much for your time, Jeff. Great interview.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.